probably the only Sanskrit specialist in the country. He is South African born. I don't think they exist. So I'm going to tell you a bit about him, so not take any of his time, but other than to say Martin Glickman is a South African Indologist, and he lives in India, where he is the director of the Sanskrit Research Institute that I think you started. He has a background in computer science and then went to study Sanskrit at the Australian National University under Dr. McComas Taylor. His work has been recognized by eminent scholars, and many of the digital tools he developed are in active use at universities such as Harvard, Chicago, Columbia University, and many others. So please welcome Martin.
Thank you, Betty, very much. And can everyone hear me fine? Is it audible? It's really a pleasure to speak in this university, and it's an interesting historical connection, because the recent history of the Cape was because it was a halfway house between India and South Asia and Europe. And I was born here, and I went to South Asia, and I studied very deeply the culture and the language. And I'm going to be covering why that happened, and also sharing the story of where that happened, and why Sanskrit, and why it sort of became a fascination and then a very deep passion for me in my life, and something that I think will... They say you never stop learning Sanskrit. It's a very vast subject, and it's become something of great universal interest lately because of yoga and Ayurveda. And when it was rediscovered, it became of great interest to many fields like logic and linguistics. And we're going to cover a fair amount of ground. If I'm moving too fast, just let me know. But I'm going to be covering a basic introduction. I can't teach you Sanskrit today. I wish that was possible. But I'm sure some of you have already encountered the language through different disciplines, and if not, we're going to encounter it right now. So we're going to start with what's called a subhashita, means good. Su is the prefix meaning good, and hasha means spoken or speaking. And I'll just say this and then we'll begin. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this is the welcoming of the discourse that we're going to be having, and I founded an institute based in India called the Sanskrit Research Institute, and this was after many years of working with the language informally and then getting very deeply into academia, deciding that there's no other way to study such a complex and beautiful subject unless I'm forced to, and university forces you to be disciplined, otherwise you don't progress. Sanskrit requires a discipline, but it's really worth it. And I founded this institute in Oroville. Oroville is an intentional community in southeast India, which is UNESCO recognized. It was founded in 1968. And I must say it's a remarkable place to do this work from. Firstly, India is deeply connected to the Sanskritic tradition. It flows into every aspect of life in India. And Oroville is an international place that gets many visiting people from all walks of life. And it's really catalyzed this work. I'm just going to talk briefly about where the works happen. Oroville is in southeast India. Has anyone been to India? Okay, fair, maybe half of you have been. So the Life of Pi was set in Pondicherry, and Oroville is 12 kilometers to the north of Pondicherry. And I have a team there. We have an alternative economy, so we work on a gift economy besides the normal economy that we have now, mainstream, you could say. And so we have a lot of volunteers who want to join and participate in our community, and they are often highly skilled. I've had linguists, I've had eminent scholars who want to reside there, and in exchange for accommodation, a bit of food, they do some work. So it's a nice balance, and it's allowed me, this is our current team, 15 people, and these are the nations. And I'll touch on Oroville because it's connected to the Sanskrit story. UNESCO was part of the recognition of it, and it was seen as a place that didn't belong to any particular individual or organization. It's there for the whole of humanity. It was a place of research, of education, of service, and a spirit of human unity, which means people were coming together to bridge divides between each other. And it currently has people from 53 countries there. And this is the charter. It was originally written in French of Oroville. It looks a bit like this. It's 5,000 acres, so this is just a glimpse. If anyone wants to see more, you can find a lot online. And planted 3 million trees. So it was a barren plateau, void of any trees, and 3 million trees have been planted, and it's changed the ecology, and the place is very beautiful and lush, and it's like a nice modern university campus. It has a bit of everything that one would need, and this is where the work has been taking place. We recently had our 50th birthday. We took soil from all countries of the world, and we made walls, and this is the Nakashima Peace Table for Asia. And when we founded it, we took soil from 124 nations, and we put it right in the center of the community. So the spirit is really about unity. And now we're going to talk about Sanskrit. So there's been a lot of recognition for Sanskrit. Many people encounter it through yoga or Ayurveda or many of the English words, or maybe they've studied linguistics. Will Durant, who wrote The Story of Civilization, he said Sanskrit is the mother of Europe's languages and the mother of philosophy. And Wilhelm von Humboldt, he was a German linguist, very eminent linguist. Sanskrit is the Anzapot zenith in the whole development of languages yet known to us. And then Max Müller, the very famous German Indologist, he said it's the greatest language in the world. Whatever sphere of the human mind, everywhere you have to go to India, because some of the most valuable instructive materials in history of man are treasured in India and India only. So when I was in Italy, they said all roads lead to Rome, and the deeper one goes, one finds a lot of roads lead back from Rome to India. And Sanskrit is a very important key to unlocking the treasures that India has gifted to civilization. Leonard Bloomfield, American linguist, he was a very key figure in linguistics. He said one of the greatest monuments of human intelligence. He was speaking about Panini, who was the Indian scholar who structured the grammar 500 BC. So India had a systemized, structured grammar since 500 BC. And this is why myself as a Sanskrit scholar can read something from 500 BC and read something from 16th century, and the grammar will be the same. And I don't think anyone can name another language where that's possible. If anyone can think of one, I would like to hear about it. So the word Sanskrit is actually, it's an anglicization of the word Samskrita. And it's an Indo-European language, linguistically. Half of the world currently speak either as a first or second language an Indo-European language. So we've got 3.2 billion speakers. Sanskrit has a documented history of 3,500 years. And this is quite a long time. And before that, there is a history, but it's dissolved in the mists of time. It's hard to, as a scholar, to say definitively, but there is a history that we know goes back many generations before that, because many of the texts, like Panini, which was written 500 BC, reference to tens of traditions before them that were as big as this tradition. So if we do some maths, we have a very, very old human thought system. And this is something that a lot of people don't know, but it has the largest body of written material in the world prior to the invention of the printing press. It's 1,000 times larger than Greek and 1,000 times larger than Latin, which formed the basis of classics and Western civilization. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's been very, very important for linguistics. Linguists have found it a key to understanding comparative linguistics and also understanding grammar. Chomsky and Bloomfield, many of the eminent linguists have studied Panini. And it was the primary knowledge-bearing language of India. it has very detailed knowledge systems. Vedic Sanskrit, and often when people talk about Sanskrit, they just think it's one language. It is one language, but there was an older form, which is lesser understood, and that's the Vedic Sanskrit. And this is from roughly 1500 BC, and these are the Vedas. Has anyone heard of the Vedas? Yes, okay, that's great. So the Vedic language is older. I had to study that at university too, and it's a little bit less unraveled than the classical. There's certain things that are a little bit unclear, but it's a particularly beautiful language. Bless you. And what's very important to understand with Sanskrit is that from 500 BC the grammar was frozen. And if we try to read Shakespeare, we can get by with modern English. If we read Chaucer, we're going to struggle a little bit. And if we go to Babel, we are going to really, really struggle. And I'll give you some examples. And this is the geographical span. And you know, the more I went into Indology, these things really amazed me. So we have 7,300 kilometers of humanity. So in the east of Iran, we have remnants of Sanskrit being used, and all the way down to Indonesia. So this was a region, and you will still see fragments. You will see the Brahmic script, which was the mother script of the Devanagari script, which became the current contemporary writing script for Sanskrit, that is still used in Tibetan. Tibetans use that, and the Thai still use Brahmi, and the Thai royal family still learns Sanskrit. It's still very much alive. Maldives was a very interesting one. It's an Islamic country today, but they speak a branch of Vedic Sanskrit. So I went there on holiday thinking it's going to be a beach holiday, and it was a linguistic feast, because I could understand a lot of their language just from having studied Sanskrit. I managed to read the Avestan language. Just by knowing Vedic Sanskrit, I could read old Iranian literature and Avestan with, let's say, 60 Afrikaans to Dutch kind of relationship, if you can picture that in your mind. So it was very close. Let's say, like, questions will come at the end of the just write that down. Yeah. So this is a geographical span of Sanskrit, and this is just Sanskrit in its original form. We're not talking about the influence that it's had, which we're going to be looking at. So just looking at Indo-European branches, Sanskrit is here, and it's the oldest continually used, unchanged Indo-European language. All of these other languages you can see are no longer used. Sanskrit is still used. If you go to India today, or Nepal, or Sri Lanka, even Bhutan in the Tibetan tradition, Sanskrit is used on a daily basis. It is an essential part of Indian culture. It is a liturgical language. It is used, even spoken still in the scholarly communities, just like Latin had been in Europe for a long time. So there's two creation stories of Sanskrit. There's the mythology from the Sanskrit tradition, which says that Lord Shiva played his drum, and out of the sounds of his damaru, the alphabet has come, and from the alphabet the grammar has come, and from the grammar the roots, and then the language has come. And then there's the scholarly version, which is that about 8,000 years ago, we had in Central Asia the development of a language that's very similar to Sanskrit, and this is going way back here, and then we have all these branches, and what I'm speaking to you now, which is English, is here. It's in the same family of Indo-European languages. And this is a blur. It's very hard to go back with definitivity and to know what was there before Sanskrit. Some people have said there was a pre-Vedic Sanskrit, but we don't have recordings or remnants. The Vedic Sanskrit was recorded in an oral tradition. Writing only came to India 2,000 years ago. So the oral tradition was handed down from scholar to scholar, or father to son, so for parampara it is called. So this is how Indo-European is looking today. These are first and second languages. So you can see we're speaking in Indo-European today, and that's why when you were to study Sanskrit, all of you are of course going to become great Sanskrit scholars soon. When you study Sanskrit, you will see incredible links with English. You will know that most of the time when you're speaking English, you're speaking a lot of Sanskrit, which is a lot of Indo-European. So I said earlier that it was the largest corpus of extant written material before Gutenberg. And our team worked out if you stack all of the manuscripts existing, today you would cross the whole of India. That's how much literature we have. And we're going to talk a bit about that. I have a project that we're working on with Google and Wikimedia Foundation with Sanskrit literature. This is the scale compared to Greek and Latin, just so you can see it on a graph. It's rather daunting. Greek and Latin have been quite well preserved. We have good efforts, but because of the climate in India, it's a moving target because manuscripts, if they're not preserved properly and digitized, then you lose them. And there's actually an urgency with dealing with the literature extant in South Asia. It's not just in India. They've just uncovered a mass of Sanskrit manuscripts in Tibet, in a monastery that was isolated, and because the climate was so cold, it was so beautifully preserved. Manuscripts love sub-zero temperatures. And it was one of the most interesting treasures of manuscripts. So this is an interesting perspective that I also came across. There was a Cambridge economist called Angus Maddison. Has anyone heard about him? He looked at GDP the last 2,000 years. And people often say, you know, India is a poor country, and I say, yes, well, it's actually not anymore. You can't say that anymore. 12 years ago, I went to India first in 2003. You could say it was a developing country, but India's actually overtaken France now, and it's becoming quite a powerhouse again, which is a boomerang of where it was once upon a time. It was 40% of the GDP of the world, and this is 2,000 years ago. And it had a rather extended colonial era. First there was the Mughal Islamic rule, and then there was the British rule. And the economy obviously has suffered, and other countries have benefited, and other empires have been built. This is happening all over the world. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because a lot of the golden age of Sanskrit was from 500 BC till around 500 AD, and then it started to peter down. And it was at a time when India was 40% of the world's wealth. If we look today, the top universities, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, the Nobel Prize winners, the funding and the grants are all following where the wealth is. So India had immense material wealth, and this is why it was so sought after. And there was one king who gave 600,000 gold coins. It's written in the text, so we know, just for duplicating one particular grammar of one particular scholar, which was just a commentary of a grammar. So you can imagine the fertility of knowledge in India at this time. And there is a revival now of Indian higher learning, tertiary education and research. And they just sent something to Mars. So there is a comeback, basically. But it's important to understand the economic history of India, to see where Sanskrit fits in. And there was a suppression of Sanskrit. Most people also don't know this. They think it has been easy riding, but Persian was trumping Sanskrit under the Muslim rule, and English, of course, which Macaulay was the most famous for being anti-Sanskrit education. And what happened with the British scholars was, if they came and they deeply studied Sanskrit, they changed their views from anti to pro. There was Bowden, a very famous scholar, who initially wanted to just have Sanskrit as a means to translate the Bible into Sanskrit and make it a shastra, or a liturgical text for the people of India. And after he had spent a few years studying deeply, he actually became pro the literature of India. But there was a period of suppression of Sanskrit. And India had many very renowned universities, and these were tertiary. From age 16 was considered tertiary. And these are well documented by the Greeks and the Chinese scholars. If you read up on it, you can find a very well documented history of India's. Takshila was the most famous one. That's in Pakistan today. And had roughly 10,000 students. And these were parallels to contemporary universities. Our Western tertiary tradition started with Bologna, and then Oxford, Cambridge. These are the first in terms of structured tertiary institutions. But India had this going for quite a while. And Nalanda, of course, was super famous. You probably have heard about that. And then William Jones, he was a judge sent to India to help develop the local laws, and he decided he's going to study Sanskrit because they had the Manusmriti, which was the laws. People always joke when they come to my office, like one whole bookshelf is law, and this was the traditional law written in Sanskrit. And William Jones learned Sanskrit, and then he said this, I'll just quote the beginning of it, he said, "The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is a wonderful structure, more perfect than Greek, more copious than Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either. It bearing a stronger affinity both in the roots and verbs and the forms of grammar that could ever have been possibly produced by accident." So this was a revival of Sanskrit was doing its own thing thousands of years ago, and there was a European revival of awareness after the British had come, and they encountered it and they didn't realize what they were in for. It was much more vast than they expected. And I'm just going to give some examples of how we can see the link. So if we want to say to turn around in Sanskrit, we say parivartate. It's created from a prefix, upasarga, which is pari, and vrt is the root. Sanskrit has 2,000 roots for words. So every word, it's like Lego. Every word has a little block, and you build a house from that block. It has a perfect verbal root system, which we will look at later. So if we look at English words, we have verbs there, which has almost come intact. And then we have inverts, diverts. These are prefixes, and reverts, converts. And we can take the Sanskrit root for knowledge is jna, and Greek knowledge, gnosis, and then we have knowledge, no, ignorant, agnostic. And we can give thousands of examples. I'm just giving you 4 here. We have a root mr, which becomes mara in Sanskrit, and then it became mora and mort in Latin, murder, mortician, mortuary, mortify, mortal, mortgage. And this is what the Europeans discovered and made them fall deeply in love with Sanskrit, and also start to ask questions of how were they linked, where was the bridge formed. Okay, and then there's a Sanskrit root stha, which means to fix something, and we've got stay, stand, establish, stable, stare. I'm sure you can all think of tons of examples. So, yeah, we could go on all day giving links. Actually, when I'm speaking English, my brain is in Sanskrit, because it gives you a lower level of, it's like in programming of computers, you have a talk to the CPU, or you can write a 3rd or 4th generation software language. So Sanskrit is on a very fundamental language for Indo-European languages. So the phonology and the sounds of the language, so it has an artificial language, Sanskrit. This is very important. And when I say Sanskrit, I'm talking about classical Sanskrit. Possibly elements of Vedic, but we don't have enough records. But there's a science which was called a Vedanga, which means you studied the 4 Vedas, and then you studied the Vedangas. And one of the Vedangas was Shiksha, which was phonology. So one of the reasons why we know with certainty how Sanskrit was pronounced is simply because there is literature that describes how to pronounce it. And they would be very specific. They would say it resonates on your lips, it is aspirated, it is unaspirated, it is voiced, it is unvoiced. These were in detail explained. And this is why many people are drawn to the sounds of Sanskrit. Because you're connecting with sounds that haven't changed for thousands of years. It's like a fire that's been going, generation to generation. India has this tradition of Akhanda Jyoti, burning fires and keeping them going in the home. And we know that the language was pronounced this way a few hundred BC, and even before the Vedic language, we know that. We don't know that with Hebrew, Greek, Latin with certainty. We have to reconstruct how it was pronounced, because we don't have YouTube videos of people teaching us Old Greek. It doesn't exist. But we do have, a science of phonology in Sanskrit. And what was really beautiful, and we'll do a little exercise now, is the vowels. So the language began with the sound A, which was seen as the most natural and the most effortless sound to make. It was just a sound that anyone can make. We all go ah. Everyone can just go ah. No. Okay. And if you do this exercise with me, what we're going to do is we're going to take R, we're going to create the vowels. This is how they created the vowels. So it was engineered. We took R and we moved it from the back of our throat, which is called guttural. We moved it to the soft palate, then to the hard palate, then to dental, and then to the lips, to labial. If you just take R and you move it, now move it to your hard palate. Your tongue has to touch the hard palate. So that was your 5 basic vowels. R, E, R, U. It was just R, simply going into 5 positions. And the vowels were seen as... So the sound R was... There was a metaphorical description in the Gita where Krishna says, I am, I is saying God, or everything, totality. I am A. So from A, the whole language comes in. In the story of how it's formed, it all starts with the sound A, and then it becomes U, and then when you want to stop the sound, we have what's called a consonant. So Ka is just stopping it in a particular, it's still in the same position. You can feel Ka is at the back of your throat. And Ta, you have different Tas. You'll have a Ta on the hard palates, but you'll have a Ta on the teeth, dental. And U is on the lips. So there's 5 positions, and pronunciation was seen as a science. So if you mispronounce, sometimes there would be recitation. I would be sitting with pundits in Varanasi, and they would make one error of 1 syllable, and they would have to restart the entire text. And pronunciation was seen as the same as with a computer program. If your software has got 1 bug, it can cause, as Boeing saw recently, it can cause major calamities. So they took it very seriously, the pronunciation. And those who studied yoga and Ayurveda, you'll know that there's a great beauty in the sounds, and you can rest assured that what you're saying is the same sound that was said since the beginning of Sanskrit. If we look at English, if I say when he got close to the house, he heard a band and chorus. Now if I go back 900 years, Bahe, Pam, Hose, Genai, Lahe, Gehurde, Bone, Swig, and Pait, word. Can't make sense of that. But in Sanskrit you can. I can go back 900 years easily, and we have the same language and the same phonology, the same sounding. So this gives it immense utility for preserving knowledge that was recorded. This is the alphabet, 16 vowels and 33 consonants. We have 5 basic vowels and then they expand. That's a long story. We could talk for an hour on how the vowels expand. And we could also talk about how the vowels become consonants. There's actually, it could just be a day seminar on how the alphabet is created. The mythology was Shiva played his drum, and from the drum the vowels came, and from the vowels the consonants came. They were born of each other. This is a poster that our team did. So we're structuring, this is in the order of articulation. And I wanted to just talk about the writing. So writing came around 2,000 years. This writing system came 700 AD, 1,300 years ago. It's called Devanagari, which means city of gods. And we don't know exactly why, but we think it was because it was in a city like Varanasi, these were the sacred cities in ancient India. And this is the one that you will see. Hindi is still written, and many of the North Indian languages still use this. Devanagari came out of Brahmi. This was the oldest script that was formed 2,000 years ago. And Brahmi was used through all of these nations that I mentioned before, except Iran. It was from Afghanistan to the Philippines. We've still got coins found in the Philippines with Brahmic scripts on them. Actually, not with Brahmic, with Brahmi in its original form. This is the form of Brahmi. Some scholars think it's acrophonic. We have coins and inscriptions all over. Most famous was Ashoka's pillars. So we've done a poster also. This was for schools in India and worldwide that we did with our team. This is one of our posters. And I just liked the fact that Brahmi had been neglected and was very important. It's not sure where Brahmi came from and how India got writing. It's still a grey area. Some say from the Phoenicians, but it doesn't look too similar, and some say the Phoenicians got it the other way, so we're not too sure. And when we're talking about script, we cannot leave out the Indus script. Does anyone know about the Indus script here? A little bit. So it's one of those very significant unsolved mysteries of late Iron Age, and it's a script that we found about 500 different characters. some people are adamant it was used to write Sanskrit, some are adamant it was used to write a Dravidian language, a South Indian language. Some are adamant it wasn't even writing. But what we do know is it was the oldest form of writing in noun, and the verbs also they tell you already a lot about who's doing it. We have three genders, neuter, masculine, feminine, and it makes it quite complicated grammatically, like any of you who've studied Latin or Greek, but this also makes it quite unambiguous when it wants to be, because there's a very specific way of saying this noun is in this case and with this number of people. But poetically, of course, it becomes highly ambiguous too. So it is highly inflected Sanskrit. One of the things, and I thought to choose water because it's very relevant to what it was to Cape Town last year, but maybe not as much this year. If we say in English, like how many ways can we say water? I think of three. Can anyone think of more than like H2O, aqua, water?
Liquid.
Yeah, but liquid's not, it's a quality of water. It's not, if you say liquid, it could be liquid, beer or... So, can anyone think of any more? Okay, so, if I say to you how to say water in Sanskrit, we made a tool, this was our team, in the field of digital humanities, and we extracted from the Meta Dictionary's 227 words, and I'm sure there's a lot more. And each of those mean water in a different aspect of water. It's a highly advanced poetic language. Actually, I never found a language with so many synonyms. There might be some in, I'm saying in all verbs, nouns, it has incredible depth of richness. And if anyone wants to see this, I can share that with you. There's love, 76 ways to say love, and each is a different type of love. Different quality of love. So this just shows you the richness of the language. And now we're going to just look at the literature, and of course we're not going to cover the full spectrum of literature. It's extremely vast. But there were some quotes on literature. I'll just do one of them. The sheer volume of Sanskrit literature remains largely unexplored. So it's still partly true today. They're only discovering new texts today, and it's so vast that you can work a whole life on just one text and still not cover the whole subject. So the literature is really what the civilization has shown it has achieved. You know, it's what's left behind, and it's still very much alive today. So I wanted to look at just one. Has anyone heard of the Panchatantra out of interest? Okay, one. Great. Okay. So, well, Aesop and Chaucer and Jean de La Fontaine had heard about it because it heavily influenced children's literature and storytelling and fables. And the Panchatantra, it's about 1,500 years. It's been retold 200 times with different versions, slightly changing the names of the characters, like a good Disney story, we say. Of course, good Disney stories come from somewhere long before. Fables, and it's been retold in 50 languages over the last 1,500 years. And Max Müller wrote about the fable tradition in Sanskrit, and Edgerton speaks about it existing in Greek, Latin, Spanish, Italian, German, and then being retranslated, going back to India from Persian and retranslated back into Sanskrit, and constantly staying alive. And it's children's literature, but it was actually it's teaching you how to well, basically between right and wrong, you know, hita ahitam, like good and harmful actions. And like here's a quote I translated this morning: in order to live a successful life, a businessman must learn 4 skills: make money, conserve it, spend it wisely, and then give it away. So this is from the Panchatantra. I mean, of course, it's just universal truths, but this is in the children's literature, and there's whole conferences just on the Panchatantra and this tradition. And this is how it's come, and you can see these are all the translations into different languages, and this is going over 1,500 years. And this is just one book. The literature is immensely vast. This is the textual history, and it went through Persia, Arabia, Europe, Southeast India, Kashmir, and the stories have changed. One of the famous stories, I'll just give you an example, was about a blue jackal, pack of dogs chasing him. He runs into a dying house where they're dyeing the indigo, and they still do that today in India. And he falls into the indigo vat, becomes a blue jackal, and goes back to the jungle, and all the animals think he's king of the jungle and a god, and even the lion starts hunting for the jackal and bringing food. And then one day it's full moon, and the jackal hears the other jackals howling, he howls, and then everyone sees he's actually a jackal but dressed in indigo garb, and that's the end of the jackal, pretty much. So it's these very little fables, and they've become stories, and other cultures have taken them on. It's just an example. The Vedic chanting tradition, so we spoke about Vedic Sanskrit, and this is 3,500, 3,500 year old tradition. And according to Garland Encyclopedia of World Music, it's the oldest notated melodies that we have. That's the Samaveda, and I'm going to play a little bit of it so you can hear what it sounds. Just so if you can hear this. So UNESCO recognized this as intangible cultural heritage, and it's still done today. Recently we helped organize an event where it was chanted for 7 days, not just the Samaveda but the other Vedas, and it's used ritually, and it's used to bring purity and good rain. The traditions are still there, just like in African traditions, we have traditions for bringing happiness and harmony to a village or a land. This is very much still used, and it's being preserved. And something maybe that you maybe didn't know is that there's Sanskrit plays that take 40 days. I can put one on, but you'll have to camp out here. We can do one. So I actually attended, not 40 days, I just attended for a few hours. But it's called Kutiyatam, and it's being preserved in Kerala. And I'm just going to show you a glimpse of it. This is Sanskrit theatre. So this is a Sanskrit theatre, and if you come to India, in the southwest of India, you can still see these performances. It's also been recognized by UNESCO. So there was a second part, but I see it's 1:45 already. I was going to go into a bit of our works that our team have done. So I studied Sanskrit University, which was classical and then Vedic, and then I had a background with computer science. So what I thought would be fit is to marry those two together. And we've produced a lot of tools that are used in universities and also by learners of Sanskrit around the world. It's going to need more time. So maybe, are there a lot of questions, or should we touch upon this? I'll go as quickly as possible. Okay, fine, great. And then we'll keep some minutes for questions at the end. So I'm going to, it's going to be a bit of a rapid journey through what we've done. There's quite a few slides. We produced a dictionary. The reason I did that was I wasn't happy with the dictionaries that were there. They were already great dictionaries that had taken decades to produce, particularly when the British came to India. They had good budgets, so they got rooms full of scholars, or buildings full of scholars, and they would consolidate all the knowledge. What I did was we produced a dictionary, which is now used by around 70,000 people a month. And I think it's around 200 countries, so it gives you an idea of where in the world people are interested in Sanskrit. And the dictionary was a meta dictionary. We took many different dictionaries and we consolidated into one. And we just tried to make it very easy to use. I actually used it through my study, and it was very useful. So this was one thing. It's an evolving project. We're still doing it. The dictionary has 1 million words. How many does the biggest Oxford dictionary have? And these are 1 million unique words with specific meanings. And we took ancient, middle, and Vedic. It's consolidated as much, and there's still a lot more to do. This was just within the field of 7 years of work. Oxford has 228,000 unique words currently. It might be changing every day because English is the lingua franca, so it's getting new words every day, literally. And we've got 1 million unique words, and this is quite interesting. We found, so we've got 75,000 people using the dictionary from 209 countries. It's been appreciated a lot by students. I'm going to jump a few of the ones that might take more detail. This was a lot of fun. I presented at the World Sanskrit Conference in Bangkok a few years ago, and one of the things I wanted to do was to develop text-to-speech that was basically to teach a computer to speak Sanskrit perfectly. It's very useful because if someone's in a remote area, they don't have someone to teach them proper pronunciation. A computer can do that. So we did this and I'll just demonstrate an example. It should come through the speakers. So what's happening here is the computers learned the rules of pronunciation, just like you would learn. I would teach you the alphabet, and then because it's a systematic, consistent phonology, there's no exceptions like in English. It's quite easy to teach a computer, but of course joining of sounds becomes complicated, but we managed to do it. We worked with the German Artificial Intelligence Institute to do this work. So this is not a recording, this is basically rendered in real time. She said Padma, this is... So the pronunciation is perfect. Even on the longer or more tricky words. So she's pronouncing it really well. And that was a lot of fun to do. So we made this tool to extract synonyms from the language. The reason I made the tool was when I realized there are so many synonyms, we have to demonstrate this to people. And usually, if I say in English, English is a very rich language, and Persian, of course, there are many languages that have a lot of synonyms, but Sanskrit, I think, is the Olympic gold medalist for synonyms. And one of the reasons is when there is a word for a noun, it's usually describing a quality of the noun. So a word for lion might be feared by deer, or king of the jungle. We would say king of the jungle as 3 independent words, but in Sanskrit it would be king of the jungle as a word, meaning lion. We'd know that that's a lion. So it's quite unique in that way. So we did something with synonyms. I touched on this earlier. Sanskrit has around 2,000 roots. There are other languages like Hebrew that have roots, but Sanskrit has a formal root system. So if you want to speak in Sanskrit, you know your roots and you know 4,000 rules of grammar, you can create any sentence. This is how the language was produced. So if you remember, about 500 rules of grammar is enough to get by, but 4,000 would be sufficient. And we made a root explorer to explore the roots. We did something where the dictionary can output in Brahmi. What we did is we did things that hadn't been done yet. So we did a word frequency tool for Sanskrit. It hadn't been done, so I needed to do it because it helps you to understand. And also shows you frequency over time. You can see in the Vedic, certain words were like a word like soma. Has anyone here heard about soma? Okay, so in the Vedic, the word soma would be, of course, big, and soma also means the moon. And it would have other meanings and they would change. So this was just something we did with our team. It's a wonderful team that's done this. We did an OCR which is being used by quite a few people around the world to digitize Sanskrit literature. And this is part of a bigger project I'm doing with Google and Wikimedia Foundation with Sanskrit literature. I'll talk briefly about that at the end. We made some games. We did a tool to type Sanskrit on a QWERTY keyboard very fast. I was frustrated that I couldn't type Sanskrit as fast as I could English or other languages, and I had to make it. You know, it's like Tesla. You know, if it's not a good electric car, then just make it. Don't wait for someone to make it. So we just made it, and it's been highly appreciated. Many people are using. We did a whole lot of posters, which are going out to the education system in India. And I'll just finish on my final point, then we'll jump to questions. We'll have about 10 minutes left for questions. Sanskrit Archives, the sort of magnum opus project that our team is doing, it's a collaboration. So it's a moonshot. We're trying to digitize extant Sanskrit literature, and the way we're doing it is similar to Wikipedia, where it's crowdsourced, because to do it even if we had a massive budget and we had hundreds of people in one room, it's going to be impossible. We have to crowdsource it, and we're going to be using machine learning, convolutional neural networks, extensively. So I have a partnership with Google's AI team, and Wikimedia Foundation are going to be helping also with some digital tools. So this is something we're working on. Probably in a year we'll be able to show you something when I speak again at UCT. And if anyone's interested in studying further, Joy of Sanskrit, it's a free first-year tertiary course available by my professor. It's online at ANU. You've got to give about 10 hours a week. If you can commit that, it's really, really worth it. For a year, it's worth it. You can teach Sanskrit at UCT afterwards. And American Sanskrit Institute is Vyas Houston. He's excellent. School of Practical Philosophy in Cape Town, they occasionally run courses in Cape Town, which are really good. And if anyone knows of anywhere else, you can share with the group in the question time. And that's the end. That's it. Thank you. So if there's any questions, sure. There's one, two. We've got 10 minutes or so.
The ancient documents that were found in the monastery in Tibet recently,
Yes.
what were they written on?
You mean what? It was just manuscripts, basically palm leaf and...
It's palm
Yes, yes. Because what happened is when India was being invaded, Tibet was the safe of keeping things. So a lot of knowledge, and Tibetans then developed the knowledge. They took the knowledge and they would develop it in their own streams of thought. They had their own traditions and they took it further, basically. Like if you've studied Buddhism or Advaita, you will find there's so much overlapping, or Nyaya, any of the philosophies from India, they're overlapping. Like logic, logic from France or Germany, they will overlap. And so it was usually palm leaf, basically, that they were written on. Sure. So.
Is Sanskrit in daily use in any city or region?
Yes, very much so in daily use. You can't, firstly, all the vernaculars in India are full, like Hindi is mostly Sanskrit. The high Hindi, like if you speak a high Hindi, you're speaking very close to Sanskrit. The grammar has changed, and these were called prakruts. Even when Sanskrit was peaking, let's say in the time of Panini and Chanakya, let's say that golden era, 1,000 years, there still were vernaculars. The poetry always, there's some plays that are written in Sanskrit and a vernacular, Prakrit, or Pali was like Buddha had different vernaculars. So it's as in daily use as it was when it started to become in daily use. It has never stopped, because every prayer, every ritual, every ceremony, when a baby is born, when someone dies, some of you have probably been to Varanasi. When they do a ritual, it's done in Sanskrit. It's never done in Hindi, it's not done in Greek, it's done in Sanskrit. So it's very much in daily use. And there are a few places, the scholarly cities, Pune, Pondicherry, Varanasi, you can still speak Sanskrit. I can go Sringeri, where Adi Shankaracharya was doing his great teachings. You can go there and just speak Sanskrit comfortably. So it's still in daily use, but it's an elite language for someone who's been initiated into a specific tradition, and it's open to anyone. At times in history, there was times where it was closed, but now anyone can learn Sanskrit and anyone can engage in the literature. Sure. So.
What about George Bernard Shaw's legacy for a new language? Is that any connection to Sanskrit? What's going on with that?
George Bernard Shaw's connection to a new language with Sanskrit? I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
He left his estate to
develop a new language.
Yes.
I mean, we develop, I mean, to create like Esperanto, you mean, like something...
Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, new languages are great. You just have to market it and get people to use them. The thing with Sanskrit is it's in continual usage from generation to generation, and it's very much alive. It's not a dead language, basically. It never died. Even under invasion, it was suppressed, and it had to happen in secret. And a lot of the knowledge systems, like if you read the history of Ayurveda, the recent history, the doctors used to secretly study, basically. But basically, creating a new language, I mean, we're doing that all the time. We're creating new dialects and new types of languages, programming languages, also languages. We're just talking to computers, we're not talking to other humans. But I don't know much about his legacy. I'll look into that.
Very connected.
Sure. Please proceed.
Okay. You mentioned Hebrew a few times.
Sure.
Okay, and I've got a fair background in Hebrew. But if I understood you correctly, the written Hebrew could be earlier. I mean, if you look at the Bible, it seems to be that the Hebrew was written a little bit earlier than Sanskrit.
Well,
my mathematics was correct with what you were saying.
Okay, writing only came 2,000 years ago, but the oral tradition, also in Hebrew you have an oral tradition that is very strong. The oral tradition was preserved and the phonology was preserved. Hebrew is blurry because there's a mythological, the biblical story of that the world started on a certain date and God had a rest and so forth, and that's great. The religious scholars will maybe look into that in different layers. I'm not an expert or a religious scholar. And then there's the historicity of the Torah, and similar to the Vedas, it comes in layers. It's not one book that just appeared out of nowhere. It's layers and recensions and so many things that happen. And Hebrew, as it is today, you see, Hebrew, there's a lot that's unknown. We don't know how old Hebrew was pronounced. There's a big debate between the rabbis. And because we didn't have a tradition of shiksha in Hebrew that stored the phonology, so we're just guessing a lot of the time. With Greek, I did a year of Greek, and no one could tell me exactly how Greek was pronounced, but we can guess by looking at words that went into Latin and then comparing, basically. Sure.
What about connections with Chinese? Because I noticed on some of the Indus script thing, they look a little bit like seal script.
Okay, sure.
Chinese.
That's a great observation. So there was, so Indus script, no one has a definitive answer. If you do have a definitive answer, you will, you'll solve the riddle. Harvard, Michael Witzel, and there's this Finnish Akshay Papola who spent. He says it's Dravidian, it's a South Indian language, but no, there's no consensus. There is a group that says it's linked to Bone Oracle script, which is very old ideographic script of China, but I can't say. I wish I could say, but
They look similar though.
yeah. If you want to see, I mean, if anyone can, yeah, they look similar, but even Brahmi has elements, and you will see in Phoenician scripts, you will also see similarities. And there's even a school of thought that says it wasn't writing; it was just seals saying that it's this product or that product. That's why it looks like fish or man or swords or shields. But we don't have a Rosetta Stone for it. We have nothing parallel. And it's lost in the mists of time so far. Sure.
When you showed those symbols and said it hadn't been translated, it looked to me like a bit like hieroglyphics.
Yes, it could be. It was a similar, there is a parallel. But it's been compared to hieroglyphics, and it's not hieroglyphics as it is. It's not a Chinese script. It's not, I mean, we know what it isn't. But maybe it will be solved. Maybe there is a way to solve it. I tried, but I failed. Sure. So,
What's the relationship with Babylonian, with cuneiform?
you mean writing, or the language?
All of it.
Different branch of languages, basically.
Because that word in
But
Hebrew
Hittite.
is Babylonian. It's a god.
Which word? You mean written the?
Online at Anu.
No. So the Indus seals, there will be like a drawing of a man you have in Japanese. It's the same for a man. You will have things that are the same in all writing systems. Written and spoken are different. But there's you have earlier Indo-European languages in Syria, basically. That's as far as things got, but that's not Sanskrit. Those are earlier attested languages that now are extinct, they're gone. So they were in that, if you looked at all those Indo-European languages, they were languages that existed and then they stopped to exist. Sanskrit has continued. And if you look at the amount of literature, you can see it was backed up. You know, if you have one hard disk, you lose it, you're gone. But they backed it up millions of times. Yeah, India was receiving so many civilizations. Alexander was in India. It was layers of history. Sure.
Is Sanskrit still spoken in other countries other than India?
Nepal. In Tibetan monasteries, they will get all money, but they will China, Buddhist, yeah. So anywhere where Buddhism has travelled, Sanskrit would be used in the literature. You would be reading Sanskrit literature. Jainism, wherever Jainism is. Hinduism, wherever that is. So yeah, Pakistan would have had it, but then when they were separated, it changed. Pakistan had a lot of the history in Afghanistan. Had a lot of the history. It's still in the museums in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and in epigraphy, and you will find pillars and remnants, but you won't find it in the contemporary. Like in the Maldives, I said, they're speaking Dhi Vehi. They're speaking Vedic Sanskrit. I can take, you there, and you will look at a Sanskrit dictionary and go, wow, they're speaking Sanskrit language. But they're in the Maldives. It's a Muslim country today, so that's how it's happened. Sure.
Could you say, you mentioned about the vibration of the sound.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about the effect on the
Okay, so there were some neuroscience studies done by Fred Travis in US where he monitored the brain and found that when you chant the Vedic mantras, it's very beneficial to the brain function. That was one study, and the other one was on people who learn Sanskrit. It is a challenging language, and it does force your neurons to work extra hard. It's a bit like training. And they also found that it does help with neural development, especially from a young age. But, you also have to say, would you get the same effect with Gregorian chants? You have to, I think the fact that it's been preserved and the fact that it's been a sacred language for thousands of years is very powerful. Many people, but scientifically, if we're just looking academically, there are studies, but they're not fully accepted that it's only Sanskrit that would have that effect. You might be doing a Khoisan ritual and have the same effect, basically. So, objectively, I'm saying.
Just a practical question.
Sure.
In one of your last slides, you had the initials ORC.
Which one?
Your 2 slides back.
That one?
No.
That one?
OCR.
Oh, OCR, optical character recognition. That's when a computer reads a written script and then makes sense of it. So we did a very interesting project. That was with Google, with an AI scientist at Google who helped us to make computers better at reading Sanskrit literature. So that's like a gift that we've given to the community, that now more literature gets digitized. I think we're going to have one or two more questions. Two more questions, then then you can come to me afterwards, sure.
Sorry. Why is Sanskrit called an Indo-European language if its geographical span starts Middle East and goes into Indonesia?
Well, it's found, it's said that if it goes into
Indonesia. Your map suggests that it went from the Middle East all the way
why, like Indo, South Asian, European, you mean, or why? It was just a name that was given when linguistics was starting to create branches of language, and well, it's certainly present in European languages except for Hungarian, Finnish, Basque, Lithuanian. I had 2 volunteers from Lithuania. Lithuanian Sanskrit dictionary is virtually, it's the closest language. Lithuania got Christianity very late, so it was managing to preserve, it was kind of isolated climatically. Iceland also have pure Sanskrit words because it was preserved, basically being an island. But it was just called Indo-European. When you name a group, Indo was that whole region, basically, South Asia, and Europe was the whole region of Europe. But it started in Central Asia, basically.
I think I can answer the question.
Sure.
For this general, because the influence of Sanskrit went etymologically speaking to the West with the culture of Greece and Rome afterwards. It moved towards the West, you see, grammatically and etymologically speaking.
Sure.
Sorry.
But it could have had another name, I'm saying, like, it's just the name.
Yes.
It could include other geographies.
In German, it has got another name. It's called Indo-Germanisch.
Exactly. There's one last question, I think.
It's more of a statement. I think the people came with the spread of the language. The people moved with the language. It wasn't that the language moved after the people moved.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Please thank our speaker.